Okay. Hello and welcome to the Volleycast. We are back after a lengthy debate. I am your host, Joe Trinsey, and on the other line, sitting on his throne of toilet paper, it's David Hunt. David, how's it going?
We mass hoarded during all of this, and now if you need a toilet paper or canned goods, we're probably the people to go to.
Yeah, the roving hordes are going up the canyons in Malibu looking for this week.
Yeah, for sure.
So crazy times. As coaches, we're all just doing the exact opposite of what we want to be doing right now, which is being with our team. So we all are kind of shut in, maybe going a little stir crazy. You were texting me, we're all kind of texting or talking to our coaching friends. And I think that we're all also looking for, content, stuff to listen to that's maybe a little bit not the news. So we're not going to get too much into speculation on what's going on out there because there's way better sources for that than us. But I don't know. We just want to talk about what coaches are doing right now. So, Dave, your season is canceled like everybody else's season, right?
Yep. Yeah.
The men. What are you doing with yourself?
Well, the men, a lot transpired in 24 hours. It went from, Tuesday afternoon, Tuesday evening, knowing that, we had a few matches coming up. I think everyone else had a few matches coming up. A lot of people were on spring break, and then all of a sudden, things started to escalate. And then we started thinking we could play matches without fans. And then by Thursday, the spring championships were canceled. So first you dealt with the trauma of having to tell your team. I say trauma, it's in a very small scope, but here's a bunch of guys that worked really hard for the school year, and now they no longer get to do what they love. So that was tough. And then the conversation becomes, as coaches, all right, now we have a lot of time on our hands, and our debrief, postseason debrief, all of a sudden takes shape a lot sooner than we wanted it to as well. So just trying to think of ways that we could be better. And one of the questions that our staff sort of posed to each other that we didn't really have an answer for, but we were just talking about it, had to do with statistics. And that's where I threw that question to you, because if I ever had time to dive into some numbers or start to analyze our team in depth, it would be right now. So
I think you're not. So just so everybody listening can hear, like what are you kind of debating? Because we're all kind of, anybody whose season, the guys whose season just came to an end kind of are forced to do this. A lot of women's teams are kind of in this mode already to some degree after your season, but what are you wrestling with in terms of doing analysis?
Yeah. So Joe, we're big into standards in our program, right? Not so much comparing ourselves to each other, but just what's the standard to be great in our gym. And those standards are based off stats from now, probably the last 7 years in MPSF or nationally in men's volleyball. And, we're big on the process as well, but at a certain point, stats come into play, right? And stats measure our performance. So our performance comes into play. It can't all be about just the process.
Yeah.
So the debate is, how much do we introduce stats into our training? And then what kind of stats do we introduce? And I thought you were always good about not looking at traditional measures in terms of hitting percentage or in-system passing percentage, but sort of looking at that more. And something that I've held on to for the last few years, and I think, sort of it reflects in Marv's eye and subsequently has been passed on to me, is just the idea of bettering the ball. And what does that look like? And athletes that can better the ball and take medium contacts that happen prior to them handling the ball and bettering it and sort of producing better outcome, those players have higher value. But that doesn't always translate in a stat sheet or a traditional stat sheet. So athletes that kill a lot of out of system balls for us have more value than athletes that kill in system balls. But how do we measure that for them other than just doing in system, out of system? Because I think it applies to all skill, right? Blocking an out of system set is a little easier than blocking a fast shoot to the outside or getting a positive touch. And how do we reward all those things? Or how do we reward the libero that turns a hard driven ball into a perfect dig, high and off the net versus, just handling a free ball and scooping it up? So.
Yeah, this is sort of the long time challenge of statistics, because statistics are just observations with a good memory. But in order to write them down, you tend to gravitate towards things that are easy to record. So it's easy to record a kill or an error or
Yep.
something like that. So hitting
Yep.
percentage is a really easy stat, and we also know hitting percentage translates to winning. So of course we care about something like that. But what you're sort of saying is like sort of the second order, where it's not just how successful the player was, but how difficult the situations that they had were. And especially
Yep.
you're trying to analyze a shortened season. So sometimes you think, well, over enough time, everybody kind of deals with the same situations. But we've all had a 250 hitter who hits 250 when the other team knows they're getting every ball in crunch time. That's a lot different than the player who hits 250 because they're worked in the situations by the setter strategically when they're set up for success. Like those 250 hitters they're a lot different. And it
Yep.
is hard to measure. So what you're looking for here um, is there a way that I can define this situation that I'm trying to measure? And sometimes what I find is when I do this kind of stuff is you sometimes just have to kind of start, and then you get a match or two or a little bit into it, and then you're like, okay, now I understand what I'm really looking for. For
Gotcha.
example, I have this doing this big project right now where I'm just again like I'm diving. This is normally my time where I'm kind of diving into video and everything right now. I feel like I'm the only one whose actually life right now has not been substantially changed, because all I've been doing for the last month, really, this is not the clinic or camp or season like that. All I've been doing is watching video anyway. So like the only thing that's really changed for me is now I can't go to Chipotle, unfortunately. So the only person I really want to talk to anyway is my wife. So social isolation is more just an extent. I've been practicing it for a while. Let's just say
I
that.
was gonna say, I think since I've known you, you've been in favor of social isolation.
Yeah, so I'm kind of I'm thriving in this new world. No, but so I've been diving deep into this defensive analysis. Like my goal, this project that I'm working through, is to watch every dig from the whole NCAA women's tournament. So all 63 matches. I'm trying to watch every ball that was attacked because I'm watching every defensive play. And I've
Yep.
been okay with kind of the idea is like I'm just trying to look at like what defensive moves, how often are they happening, what's successful, what's unsuccessful. I think I did a little bit of this with back with USA with the women's national team, but I want to get an idea of like, okay, what's a little different in college, And what I found was I kind of like stopped and started this project like 3 times over the course of 2 weeks because I didn't totally know what I was looking for. And
Right.
then after just looking for these patterns enough, now I'm starting to see, okay, like now it's categorizing in my mind. So what you're trying to do is like to loop it back to what you're talking about is you're okay. The example of these hitters, and you're trying to say, okay, if these two guys both hit 250, but are the situations that they're scoring different? And maybe is there some stuff in the middle there that's not a kill and that's not a block or an error that's still providing value to the team? Is this guy making better zeros? Is he getting dug, but they're not able to kill it back in transition? Because if you can start doing that, if you can start defining the situations or the behaviors that are different, you can start teaching them. Like ultimately, that's what we're looking for as coaches is like, if I can put my thumb on that intangible aspect and I can define it a little bit, then I can
Yep.
start teaching it. Like it's
Yep.
hard to just say to a guy, okay, well, we need you to be productive in this situation. And then he's saying like, well, what does productive mean? How do I do it if I don't do it intuitively? And then, there's a lot of this common sense that coaches are already doing. Okay, this situation, it's a high ball with 3 blockers up. Hey, we'd rather have you recycle that ball. I mean, obviously this is huge in men's volleyball. It's even
Yep.
becoming bigger in women's volleyball. Out of system, you'd rather recycle than get dug.
Right.
So if you go back to Beijing Olympics, even 2008. So it was triple block, tip to the setter, go put up a triple block, get another tip to the setter. It was like, not always to that extreme, but that was a really common play. And now you're seeing less of that. And now you're seeing more guys play for the recycle, which is, you're leading to these blocking changes where blockers are blocking a little bit differently because they're trying not to get recycled. And it was just kind of this process, I think, of coaches putting a finger on what some of these smarter players were doing intuitively. Like, that's what I'm looking at when I'm trying to do this analysis. I'm not assuming that I'm going to crack the code or I'm going to innovate anything. Like, I think that coaches really don't innovate. It's players that do the innovation. And I think as coaches, what we can do is try to observe when a player kind of has a knack for a situation. And it's like, okay, this player consistently executes in this situation. And like, what are they doing a little differently? Like, what have they intuitively picked up? Or maybe they've been coached by somebody before, something like that. What have they kind of figured out how to do that I can then teach to everybody else who doesn't pick it up as intuitively?
Right. No, yeah. I mean, you articulate it much better than my text message to you for sure. But then it goes back to my thought is, all right, now the practical analysis, right? Yeah, I agree with all of that. But then I remember some conversations we've had in the past about, who the consistency of measurement is huge, right? So this probably means that one person is doing this. It's not a collective effort. So in this situation, it's probably me sitting down and coding some hours of video. And then my question to you that I posed before we started this was, at what point is that line sort of leveling out where I can code 10 more matches, but it's not going to significantly alter my data? And I'm sure a lot of other people have that question, how many matches am I really looking at before, I have a good answer, I have a good feel for that?
Yeah. So there's two pieces there. So there's one kind of little one that you had at the beginning, which was sort of like, you need some consistency when you're doing. The more subjective the measurement is, the more it's good if you have the same person doing it over and over again, because my call, for this situation might be different than your call. But what I'm going to try to do whenever I do any of these analyses is like, hey, how could I set up a rule so that I could teach anybody to do it?
Gotcha.
So like, I think that most of us, like for something like a 3-point passing scale is pretty well there. It is, like, by definition, it's subjective, but most people who have played a little bit of volleyball, you kind of show them, okay, this is a perfect pass, this is medium, this is bad. They can pretty much get it mostly right. And then the more fine nuances you're trying to look, the harder that is. But I try to give myself a rule to follow when I'm doing these situations. And sometimes that rule doesn't emerge till you've already done it a little bit. And then you just get a better sense for it. So that's like kind of what I try to do, or like, as I'm grading something, like if I'm trying to see, like, say I'm looking at, okay, which of these approaches on a high ball is better? And I'm trying to get a figure out. I really try to like pause the video before I can see the result of the play so that I don't bias it, because we always kind of have these biases. Like, I've been teaching guys to approach wide at an angle on a high ball. And then I did this study to figure out which is the best approach. And hey, what a surprise. It showed that approaching wide at an angle was the best. You know what I mean?
Right.
So like, I try to like pause the video, record what I think the action was, and then look at the result so that I influence a little bit less. So that's a little note on that. And then what you're asking is, hey, how many matches do you need? No. And, this is the field of statistics, and there's all these like formulas, and you have confidence intervals, and you have all that kind of stuff. But I find a very simple way to do it is to just start doing it and record into like a totals. So say I do 3 matches. Yeah. And I put I record them, and then I put them into like an Excel spreadsheet or something like that. And then I do my totals for 3 matches. Again, okay, whatever this is, 50% and 75% here and 2.2 over here, whatever it is. and then I do another match. And then I see if those totals change much.
Gotcha.
Because at a certain point, you get a certain amount of matches in, and then you add another couple of matches, and the totals hardly budge because
Gotcha.
now you're kind of converging.
Yeah.
So I think that's, that's sort of like a rule of thumb that probably, like the trained statistician in me cringes in a little bit, but for practical purposes,
Yeah.
that's what you're looking for. Like you're kind of just looking for things to converge. So that's kind of, I'm doing this defensive analysis, and, I got about 35 matches in, and a lot of the numbers were, they're pretty much staying flat at this point. I'm going to finish all 63 matches just out of completion, because I might as well, just to kind of say that I did it, and maybe there's a little bit more insight, and my eye and all that is great. But I'm at the point now where the additional data is not really changing the overall conclusions. The overall conclusions have been pretty, they were maybe fluctuating a lot after 10 matches and 15 matches. And once I got 30, 35 matches in, they started getting pretty stable. Now, that doesn't mean that 30, 35 matches is true for everything, because some things start getting constant earlier, and some things maybe take a little bit more time, so that's kind of how I would go for that, is just record after each match. And then once the result, adding a new match doesn't change the numbers all that much. For you as a coach, you've got the information that you mostly need.
And you brought it. So for your study, obviously you have a lot more randomness in terms of there's a lot of teams in that, right?
Yeah.
So there's a diverse set of data. For a coach that's going back at the end of their season, what do you suggest? Is it, I'm looking at, 5 matches of my own, 5 matches from another? Is it 2, 2, 2, 2? So if you have a league of 10 teams, you're getting 20 matches, but 2 of each. Obviously there's going to be some carryover there, but what do you suggest?
Yeah. So it's a really good question. So basically you're kind of asking, hey, depending on what you're trying to observe or what you're trying to learn, your sample matters. So if you're trying to draw like really broad conclusions about how the game must be played, you want a really wide-ranging sample. You want lots of different teams, because you don't want one team influencing it. And I'm looking at this defensive analysis, and it is going to be a little bit biased because, okay, Stanford and Wisconsin played in the national championship, so by definition, they played more matches than a team that lost in the first round or two. So they are biasing a little more, and the more success, you know what I mean? Like there is going to be a little bias there, but it's a little bit less because you're taking a broad sample. On the other hand, you can have plenty of valid data from just 1 or 2 matches if you're looking specifically at one player and their behavior. Like if you're looking at, say you're looking at a passer, and you're just saying, okay, hey, when you pass with this particular technique, let's record how well you pass. And when you pass with this other technique, let's record how well you pass. You can have perfectly good data after just one match if they passed a bunch of balls, and because it's very particular to them. And all you're trying to do is draw conclusions about them. What makes that, like, you might not be able to say like, okay, this particular piece of technique is helping you pass better. Well, you might not be able to say, okay, so every single volleyball player in the whole world needs to pass like that. But even just 1 or 2 matches, if you're talking about a very specific behavior for a specific player, can have a lot of validity. Things like middle hitters hitting out a serve receive. Hey, when you get your entry to this particular point and then come in and hit, you're a lot more, you went 6 for 8. And then when you got trapped on your serve receive entry and then you had to come at such a flat angle, then you went 1 for 5. Like that's not a bad conclusion. And maybe, you want to get maybe a couple more matches than that. But so basically you want to the broader your scope of conclusions that you're trying to draw, the broader your investigation needs to be. The more specific that you're looking at one particular player, you don't need to be quite as broad. You want to be more narrow.
Right. And obviously with one player, you're limited to one team, right? So then you're going there.
Exactly.
That makes sense.
Maybe I'd like to get, for example, if I'm looking at a passer, and I'm looking at passing technique or whatever like that, and this team was all spin. Well, I just went, hey, maybe I want to get them a match. This guy's got some more floats or something like that, just to make sure that their opponent wasn't totally biasing that. So
Yeah.
maybe could I get 2 or 3 matches against 2 or 3 different opponents? Like that can help a little bit.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Makes sense. You had brought up something, and now I'm blanking out on it, but it was it had to do with gathering the data, right? And that's really what our right now with downtime, right? I don't know sort of what people are looking at, but it seems like this is a valuable time to gather data, right? With this social isolation thing going on. Something that you had brought up a while ago to me, I think we were in the office one time, and you had got me started. You had taught me with a set of rules, whatever it was that we were looking at, but you said, hey, don't start looking, like, don't run the analysis until we have however many matches, because you didn't want it to sort of skew then what we were looking at going forward. And do you remember that principle, or does that?
Again, this is all the hard part, because a scientist, an evidence-based scientist would tell you, well, like, you should have a double blinding, so the person who records the data can't be the person who analyzes the data, because like you could bias yourself or this or that.
Right.
So these are kind of the trade-offs that you have to make. So sometimes be honest with yourself if you're challenging your assumptions. Like that's something that I'm trying to do, and it's hard because I'm doing this defensive analysis, and I have particular defensive moves that I've liked to teach better, or I favored. And every time somebody like does that move, and I'm like, oh, are you sure? Let me run it back to really make sure that they didn't get the dig. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like, so I'm like trying to just be double aware of that, because I don't, because what you don't want to do is like, you run your totals after 10 matches, and it's like, oh, my favorite technique is not in the lead right now, so maybe that's going to unconsciously bias how I score the ones going forward and stuff like that.
Right.
So that is what you have to balance. There's no perfect solution there, like unless you had like you had somebody there that you could run the totals and record them without telling you, and
right.
then you do a couple more matches, and hey, don't tell me what the results are, but just tell me if they've changed. You know what I mean? And at the grand scheme of things, for what we're operating at, it's not realistic. I think a lot of times it's not real.
Gotcha.
Maybe when we were working together at USA, we had enough people, we had enough minions who were volunteering and including ourselves, enough people putting in man hours that we could maybe get a little bit sharper on that, as you would hope when you're trying to go for an Olympic medal. That we always have with our teams is, I would just say, be aware of some of these traps and know yourself, is probably the best thing that I can recommend.
Yeah. And then for somebody that doesn't have data volley or a program like that, what's the best way to go through and record this? Or do you think you have to have some sort of stat program or video analysis program?
Well, I'll tell you what, like, I've been really diving into beach volleyball. So my 2 big projects have been just the indoors. Obviously the indoors is still the bread and butter for just volleyball in this country, but beach volleyball, women's beach volleyball is such an exploding sport.
Yeah.
Beach volleyball is so far behind indoor when it comes to analytics. Beach volleyball players now are just, for the most part, like knowing what their side out percentage is and stuff like that. And it's not a knock against the sport, because in some ways beach volleyball is ahead of indoor volleyball in some other areas, but it's harder to record data. Like, it's harder to bring a laptop. It's a real challenge just to film your matches in beach volleyball, like that the camera doesn't get knocked over, doesn't get blown over by the wind, all that stuff. So, that's why it's exciting to work with some of these beach programs, because there's just so much opportunity. Like, hey, how much does passing matter in beach volleyball? Like, we can't say that. Like, hey, what's a perfect pass in beach volleyball? I got some data on it, but like, even just
technically, aren't they all ones, right? Because you're only setting one guy. Is that not how it works?
Yeah, it's everything. So, Yeah. Well, that's why it'd be nice if you pass a little tight, so you have a second option to go on too.
Yeah,
Literally
that's a
things
good
like
point.
that. So that's why it's so exciting. But also because there's no analytic tools yet, I'm actually, spoiler alert, I'm working on some stuff like that. I've got some stuff in the works. But right now I'm literally pencil and paper. That's what I'm
Right.
doing when I'm recording these things, and I just go through and I have the grid. This is not going to make for exciting audio, but Dave, I can just show you on the video here is like, this is how I'm recording this information right here.
Yeah.
You know what
And
I
in
mean? And
small writing on small paper. I'm shocked, Joe.
There's pages
Yep.
and pages of it in here. I got
Yep.
hundreds of pages by hand, is how I'm doing it right now. And, coaches were recording information well before we had computers, and it's
Right.
a little less convenient is all it is.
Yeah.
So if coaches don't have data volley or whatever, you just bring up the video in whatever program you have, and you get some graph paper, like a graph notebook is what I like. But even if you just print the pieces, you print off a Excel spreadsheet or something, and you just mark tally marks in whatever
Right.
you're trying to record.
Yep.
And then just the pain with that. I mean, what's nice about data volley is like, you can ask it different questions after the fact. So like when you work up your spreadsheet, you're recording it by hand. If there was a category that you want to include in the 4 matches you already did, you got to go back and do them over. So you may need to just test out some things to make sure you're recording what you want to record ahead of time.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
But I mean, that's all good stuff. I think at least for me, it gets me going in the right direction, gets me started. And now it's just the hours of video that have to be analyzed. And that's the thing, we're all looking, if we're going to do these analysis or analyses or whatever it is, it's a lot of man hours, right? That's, I think, what stops us sometimes is you get started and then life takes over. But now it seems like we all have plenty of time on our hands.
There's one thing we all have right now. It's time on our hands. So I'm expecting like the next volleyball season, whenever it happens, whether it's played by humans or zombies or robots, whatever ends up, however this ends up, I suspect the next volleyball season, teams are just going to be hungry, and coaches are going to have like some really, really sharp plans. Either that, or coaches are going to have way too much time on their hands, and they're going to just like invent a whole bunch of dumb strategies to mess their players up. But one way or the other, it'd be interesting to see it. And yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it all comes down to, we have this great knowledge now. Can we train our teams to be able to execute it? So I think you might end up with just a bunch of frustrated coaches that are hyper aware of what their teams aren't doing. So I could see that happening real quick.
Ignorance was bliss. Ignorance is bliss.
Yeah.
All right, Dave. Well, it was good to talk to you. Volleycast back after a long hiatus. Let's check in. I might do a few of the solo sods or whatever like that, and be talking to some other people. But let's check in regularly. Make sure you're safe up there in the Malibu canyons, and keep us posted on how it's going. I think just a lot of coaches are itching to figure out what they can do to help their teams when they can't be in the gym. Hey, let's figure out a way to get the level of play as high as we can when we can get back on the court.
No, I appreciate it, Joe. Thanks for taking the time, and I'm glad it's back.
All right. Take it easy, Dave.
All right, bye. See ya.